Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Longford launch of the running book by John Connell. We had hoped, John, to be talking face to face in the library in Longford. That wasn't to be, but we're here courtesy of Zoom to have a little chat over the next half an hour or so about the book and about some of the themes that you've been addressing in it. I suppose, first of all, to congratulate you. Here it is. It's a terrific read, and well done. As you can see, I've been making lots of little notes here in preparation for our chat. I suppose the first thing that strikes me is it's very hard to categorize it. It's partly, I suppose, autobiographical. It's also a book about memory and landscape and absence. We might talk about that as well. It's a travelogue in many respects. So I suppose if I was a bookseller, I'd have some difficulty about deciding exactly where to place the book. I suppose you might say, well, put it in the front window prominently. People can see it. But because it's the running book, I want to begin with running, if I might. You say somewhere early on that people who run, and I mean people like yourself who run fairly seriously, do it because they're either running for something or they're running from something. And my first question to you is, in your case, which is it? Are you running for something or from something?
Well, hello everybody, Longford and the wider community that are watching this, and thanks Brian for taking the time this evening to talk to us, and happy Halloween to everybody as well. I suppose it's a really good question. I would have started as someone who was running from something. Namely, I was running from, I suppose, a bit of a collapsed life, some mental health problems, and there is a Japanese writer, Yukio Mishima, and he was nominated for the Nobel Prize several times, and or in the process of being nominated several times. And he was Japan's foremost writer before Haruki Murakami, and he talked about the idea of physical fitness descending upon him like an idea, and he wanted to cultivate the garden of the self. And really, for me, running did descend as an idea. It came out of a want to, in a sense, run for something rather than run from something. And I talk about that in the book. And it's funny that you picked up on it, Brian, because a lot of the media and interviews have picked up on it. And I suppose we can all spot the person doing the mini marathon, and or it's the first days of January and they have a New Year's resolution. But the people who are running from perhaps catastrophes in life and trying to remake themselves, they're the more interesting characters. And I remember Pat Short said this on the Late Late once. He said, I'm interested in the guy with the limp, not the guy with the perfect walk. He said, because the guy with the limp has a story. And I suppose those people who are running from something often have a story. But ultimately, I was a person who came from running from problems to running to. And I was out for a run today, and I was running out of enjoyment. And I suppose ultimately, that's the space we want people to get into.
But that initial impetus did that come from what you refer to in the book as the lost time period, when you suggest you had various issues, mental health issues, melancholia, and I think you talk about being for a period of weeks just in your room, unable to come out. Yes,
absolutely, Brian. For those of the readers who are on the journey of the Longford books, this is something I touched upon in the Cow book, but I didn't really go into it in a huge amount of depth. And here I wanted to, I suppose, talk about that time where I would have been stuck at home in my parents' house. I'd come home from Canada, things were not good. And really, in a sense, I had to remake myself, Brian. And I imagined myself as, I had been someone who had been a journalist and a filmmaker, and I traveled the world, but really I hadn't ever come to the root sense of who I was. And I hadn't really come to have, in a better word, self-love for myself. I had got a lot of accolades as a young man for journalism, but really all of it was done towards getting approval from other people. And really running, as strange as it might seem, was a way to build a new foundation. And in building the foundation, the lost time actually, as I talk about in the book, became the found time. And I was talking to a friend recently who's a psychotherapist, and we were talking about this notion of people being lost and people being found, and absence, I suppose, as you've said yourself, that ultimately that it's in the darker moments of life that we remake ourselves and re-find ourselves. And it might seem a strange book to have, the running book, I have it here, would have seemed a strange book to follow on from the cow book, but really in my head this was the next part of the story. This was the next part.
I mean, I'm interested in why running, because you did run as a youngster, and in fact you maybe had ambitions to be a competitive runner. That wasn't to be, and you talk about that, and you write about that. But I'm just wondering why your redemption, if that's not too strong a word, was found in running. Because is it something to do with the fact that it addresses both the physical needs that you have, but also your mental health? It gives you benefit on both grounds.
It is, Brian. I finished the cow book with a very small run around the parish. I had come back from Spain. I'd been working on the book, and I went for a small run around the parish. And I remember the editor at Granta saying to me, "This is a beautiful section of the book." And I suppose I would have the book is dedicated to Stephen Ray, and Stephen and I have been friends for about 5 or 6 years, and I had talked to him in the year I had finished the cow book. I had talked to him about the next book, and I said, the next one is going to be about running. And he would have questioned me and said, well, why is that? And I said, I can't really tell you, but there's something there, and there's also something about history. And these are two themes that I want to explore. And then I would have come across the German writer W.G. Sebald, who wrote Rings of Saturn, which is considered a masterpiece, but that's essentially, he called it an English pilgrimage, and it was a walk around a part of northern Britain, or northern England as it was. And I suppose I thought there's a way to talk about my story through movement, and yes, redemption. The redemption was a part of it, and I suppose finding a way, finding my way, which was physical fitness as a way. And I suppose as a younger person, I would have had a lot of control in my life when I was involved in athletics, and I always dreamed about doing something serious with it, but I never did. But running and physical fitness was a way to mind myself and be a parent to myself. And then there was an Irish American doctor, Dr. George Sheehan, who is credited as sort of starting off the running and jogging boom in the 70s in America, and he talked about making each day your masterpiece. And that to me really, really hit me, because I said, and it's a lesson we can all take, whether it's going for a walk or a jog or a bicycle ride, is taking a moment in the day and making that your masterpiece, to say, well, I did something for me today that counted. And I suppose physical fitness and movement is something that we have all taken for granted up until this time. And now when we're living in these 5-kilometer restrictions, we realize how much, how valuable the act of movement is.
The structure of the book, just for the benefit of those who are listening to the conversation but perhaps haven't read it yet, is this run that you take from your home near Ballinallee down to Edgeworthstown, and then back up to Granard, and then back home again. Have I got the route correct?
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
And that's a marathon distance. I mean, literally, it's that kind of 40 plus K. So it's a good long run, and we'll talk a little bit about your physical experience and how you get through the wall and all that in just a moment. But right the way through that, you pepper your account of this run with the history, the heritage, the families who've lived in the areas you're passing through. And I'm just intrigued by that, because it really does open up the history of that part of Longford to readers. And I wonder, is that particularly something that is important to do now, that we remember our past, that we acknowledge what happened, that we think about it and talk about it?
Yeah, I think so, Brian. I would have to credit my father, who has always had a deep love of history, who would have told me a lot of these stories as a youngster. And then I suppose it made an impression on me. Even when I lived overseas, I would have thought about those stories. And in a sense, I had this mind map of this history that I suppose, Brian, the Cow Book had been such a success that I'm allowed a literary gamble. I'm allowed to do something a little bit different. And Longford had been so good to me as well, that I wanted, in a way, to talk about Irish and global history to a certain extent, but from a local perspective, and show that that the history in one place, in one small place of Ireland, is actually universal. But really, that place could be in anywhere. And I think that's what Sebald did as well. He when he was walking, he was talking about Roger Casement and fish and all sorts of things. And I in a sense, wanted to talk. It's a sort of a meandering essay in a way, isn't it?
It reminds me of what I suppose maybe Patrick Kavanagh's mission was as a poet, to find the universal in the local, in the townland. It's a similar exercise. And again, these stories come through. I think, is it the Charters or Charteris brothers? Yes. That is just such a sad story, and again, I imagine one that's largely forgotten, even perhaps in the area today.
Yes, the Charters, they're actually people that I've wrote about in a family I've wrote about in multiple forms. And I've wrote a short story about, I suppose, to help people. The Charters are a family that live in Ballinallee. And they're an Anglo-Irish family, and there was one brother who was tragically killed by the IRA during the War of Independence. It's a disputed thing. Some say he was innocent, some say he was an informer. There was another brother who died on the Titanic, and there have been many people from Longford who were on the Titanic, but sadly he had died. And then there was another brother who fought in World War I and died. So there were this family that, to me, had taken part in, pivotal global events, really, from the Titanic to the War of Independence to World War I, and yet their heritage was tragedy. These are the things that always stuck with me, and in a sense, I didn't want them to be forgotten. And with the brother who was killed by the IRA, I wanted to, Ian McEwan talked about this. He said sometimes fiction can allow people the ending that they deserved in real life that they were denied. And in writing about them, that I remember talking about, the men are on the boat, and they end up being people who knew each other. And I suppose from the local to the universal, their neighbour was Field Marshal Sir Henry Wilson, who was Chief of Staff of the British Army. So I supposed, in a way that writers and novelists can do, that perhaps he could have certainly known about the young fellow, and maybe he could have in some way taken him away from the front line, but that didn't happen. And in a sense, I wanted to make sure that it was remembered that that this young man had fought like so many other Irish people in World War I, and that he sadly didn't make it home.
Yeah. So you have individuals like that who are perhaps not very well known outside, anyway, maybe an immediate circle, and then you've a figure like Sean McKeown, the blacksmith of Ballinallee, a great War of Independence hero. But again, you know, you touch on the complexities in his life, the Civil War split. He obviously was in pro-treaty and was involved in Fine Gael politics in later years. You know, and again, very, very timely, because we're coming into that period now and beginning to think about how do we remember that period. You know, how do we reflect on everything that happened and the terrible tragedy of that division and that violence. And again, you find that, if you like, that bigger picture concentrated in the story of McKeown in Longford.
Yeah, I think, you know, Sean McKeown is someone in our part of the world who is a hero, and someone I would have grown up, you know, admiring greatly. And I actually gave the Clonfin ambush lecture earlier this year before COVID and everything else hit, and it was an enormous honour. But McKeown too is a fully rounded, real human being, and the history that we remember and the history as written doesn't always, you know, it doesn't always compute. And I suppose Sean McKeown had a tough War of Independence. He was, you know, he was Collins's man in the Midlands, and was captured and was going to be sentenced to death. And but then, you know, he was released, and but then he had a very tough civil war, and he would have had to. He was involved in the pacification of the Northwest, involved in Sligo and places like that. And you know, I didn't fully know enough about it, and it was actually seeing a documentary about Michael McDowell's relations, the former minister, who would have been involved on the opposite side. And it just showed this complex nature. And, you know, I deliberated a long time about that, Brian, talking about the Civil War, because it's so complex. And, you know, we're in this decade of centenaries, but everyone has always said to me, including Jim McFertry, said, you know, the hardest one is yet to come. And how do we remember that time when, as I say in the book, you know, even our heroes can't be fully heroes. And I just find McKeown an enormously human person. And I suppose the tragedy of the Civil War must have been very much deep felt by him, because he would have had to face men that he had probably perhaps fought beside, you know.
And so all of this running through your head as you run the roads, putting one foot in front of the other. But before we maybe talk a little bit more about the running, just one other part of our history that you touch on, and it goes back to this reference I made earlier to absence, the famine, the Great Hunger. And you know, you talk about that, I think, as the hinge moment, and that's not maybe the phrase you use, but it's
0 hour,
0 hour, exactly, the 0 hour in our history, which I thought was an intriguing take on that. And we all live in its shadow to some extent. And you say, you know, the 75,000 people who aren't in Longford, who would have been there were it not for that Great Hunger. And I suppose it is the unspoken 0 hour to a large extent in our history, because we're the descendants of those who survived.
Yeah, Brian, it's you know, John Mayer, the Irish revolutionary who would have fought in the American Civil War, he referred to it as the skeleton at the table. And we are the survivors. It's a strange thing, Brian. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was born in 1895, and his father would have been born shortly after the famine. And yet, you know, it's very recent in my family, and yet there's absolutely no folklore, no familial memory about it. And I think there is so much that happened, not just in Longford, but in the nation, that they say there was a silence. And, you know, it's an interesting, I heard it referred to in a different way. After World War II, they said that German people got very fat. And they said they got very fat because it was easier to eat than to talk about what had happened. So dinner table conversations, people just ate more instead of talking about what happened. And in a sense, we grew fatter, we grew wealthier, we grew healthier after the famine. But so much happened then. The 0 hour thing is actually taken from the Pol Pot regime referred to the start of the regime as the 0 hour, and that has defined Cambodia since that happened. They essentially stopped the clock and started again. And in a sense, I think we stopped the clock and we started again. It wasn't long before the famine that Daniel O'Connell had been leading the emancipation movement, and his next movement really was going to be Home Rule. And everything just collapsed. The O'Connellite movement was largely ignored after the famine happened, and I think we'll never really be able to fully understand it. And I suppose it shows that it was only last year that the first film was made about the famine, Black 47, and we haven't. There's not much literature. There's not songs about it. It's there's 75,000 ghosts in Longford, on the roads in Longford when I go for a run. There's millions more around the whole nation, and we'll never fully know. I think we'll never fully know what that Ireland could have been like. And my wife, who's Australian and sees things with the outsider's eye, always reflects to me, said it's always seems so small here. But really, we would have had a big European population by now, like the size of Belgium or similar, if the famine hadn't happened. We'd be looking at 10 or 15 million population instead of the roughly 5 we have now. So.
We began talking, John, about running, and I want to come back to that, because I want to come back to this thing that intrigues those of us who don't run, and I don't. It's a long time since I've run anywhere. The wall, when you're running that kind of marathon distance. Now, tell us, because you do talk about hitting the wall. But what I'm wondering, is it always at the same point? Is it always a similar kind of experience, or can it just vary on your mood on the day or the conditions or where you're running?
Yeah, well, a good question, Brian, and good to bring it back to the running. The wall, I suppose, well, there's many walls. I suppose some days the wall is, I'm not able to run past 5 kilometers and that's it. But in the sense of a marathon, the wall really is the point where physical exhaustion is upon you. And really, you have to, Pavlo Nurmi, who was a Finnish distance runner, he said, everything I am because of my mind, and all the rest is mere pieces of rubber. And really, the wall is a mental point where if you can break through it, if you can get through it, you'll be able to keep running for another 10 or so kilometers, roughly. It happens at different times in different places, Brian. Unfortunately, it's never. You can never say, well, I'm at 35 kilometers, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
I often remember running different distances, and I remember actually a run I had recently, and I ran 5 kilometers, and I just didn't think that I'd be able to keep going. I said I was just going to chalk it down to, well, this is a bad day, and I'll retire early. And I just pushed through and ended up running for another 2 hours. And, that was been the milder form. But I remember the first marathon I ever did, which was in Spain. The only thing that went through my mind, and it seems really vain to say, but it was the first time I was doing a marathon. And I said, well, I can't wait to put this on Facebook and let everyone know I did a marathon. And that was it was only pride that pushed me through. But ultimately, I remember being on a race with a guy from Cavan who said to me, "You really get to know yourself on a long run, and you realize you're a lot more stubborn than you think." And I think, in a sense, it's stubbornness that gets us through. And in a way, running a marathon is like writing a book, because it takes pacing, and I think that it takes a second wind. It takes the ability to to know that there is an end there, but you may not be able to see it yet.
Yeah. Did you say a moment ago you've already been out for a run today already? Yes.
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Is it a daily thing? I mean, the day is incomplete, is it, or would it be
Absolutely,
less
Brian.
frequent than
It's my moment in the day. Now, I have to say, it was raining very hard, as we all know, this week. So I wasn't out for 2 days, and really missed it. And went for an hour and a half run today. And it would be. I find that it's my way of. Particularly, I've spent the summer writing a new book, the last in the trilogy, and the running was a way to make sense of what had happened in the day. But also, I find I just get tired halfway through the day, and I can't look at a screen any longer. And I think, my friend, Father Sean, who I mentioned in the book, our parish priest, talks about this. He says, there isn't anything quite like the tiredness of writing, and I suppose it's because you're in another world, and then you have to emerge back into and you're totally immobile. You're just sitting in front of a desk. So, I try and do it every single day. Yeah.
So I imagine that you can't really, you couldn't really imagine life without running. And can you imagine running without music in your headphones? Seems to be a big part of it.
Yes. No, it's a huge part, Brian. I do love music, and recently I've actually taken to listening to podcasts. But before that, it would have been music, and I suppose it was a way to find a little bit of playfulness and a bit of silliness. We all live such serious lives at times, and I think again, it was Dr. Sheehan who talked about that. He said you have to find your play, and really for me, listening to some music from the 1970s, from the likes of the Eagles or something like that, it's just a way to put a smile on your face, and all the better if someone sees you and hears what you're saying, because you can put a smile on their face as well, And I think I'm not someone who is obsessed with times, or I don't have one of these pedometer watches and things like that. I like to what I call free run, but really it's a bit of free play. And I think my mother would have always said this to me. She's a Montessori teacher, and she would say children learn by playing, but I think adults learn by playing too, and we can forget to be young again. It doesn't matter what age you are, you can be young every day, even if it's only for half an hour. But music is.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to chat, and congratulations again on the book. We had plans to get together face to face back in March. I think you were returning from your travels. That didn't happen because of the lockdown. We're certainly locked in for the next while. But courtesy of Zoom, it's been great to have a chat, and every success with the book. So the third, the final book of the trilogy is you're working on it. So do you have a indicative publication date yet, or anything, or a title, or anything you can?
It's called the Riverbook, and it's about a canoe trip and down the Camlin River. So the main river, it's a more spiritual book. It's the end of this story of my life, and I hope people will enjoy it. It's no publication date yet or anything like that. We'll just stay tuned, I suppose. It's going out to market like a cow, so hopefully it'll do well.
Hopefully the marts will be open again for
exactly, yeah. Exactly.
Get the bidding going. John, listen, great to talk to you again, and continued success, and the very best to you and all your family. And I look forward to seeing you actually face to face before too long, hopefully.
And you, Brian. Thanks very much.
Bye for now. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.